This coffee table cost me $50 on Facebook Marketplace, and if we haven't met yet, I'm Jade, I'm a solo mum, and I'm flipping furniture to fund my dream home, and I want to teach you how to do the same. The first thing I like to do when I find a new piece of furniture is look online for similar items. Now, I found these coffee tables starting at around $1,100. They're a balustrade coffee table, and they're being refinished in beautiful raw timber tones, which I know works really well for my area. My first step was to remove the box from the center. In its previous life, it had obviously had some doors and those little sections, but in keeping with my inspiration, I wanted to completely knock it out. The sections came out relatively easy, but it did expose two channels where the timber wasn't actually connected into the base of the coffee table, so I knew I'd have to come back and do something creative to fix that later on. If you've been following me for a while, you know I've recently bought a soda blaster, and I wanted to see if I could remove the paint from these turned legs using it. I found that it removed the paint really well from these small sections, but my compressor couldn't really keep up to do larger sections. This is a fantastic alternative to chemical-based strippers or hand sanding, but if you wanted to step it up and do larger sections, then you'd need to get quite a large compressor. At the moment, for just doing these little details that normally I would have to hand sand, this size gun and compressor are perfect. I left the areas that I'd be able to get to with my orbital sander and mainly focused on the rounds of the legs and in these little detailed sections. I used my detail sander around the legs and then got my carbide scraper out and used it on the sides of the piece and on that very bottom shelf. Moving on with my orbital sander, I started with 120 grit sandpaper and worked my way up the grades slowly, finishing with 240 grit sandpaper. I always like to start with a 120 grit sandpaper because it creates less friction on the top of your piece, so you're not gunking up as many of your sanding discs and you're less likely to create the little pigtail swirly whirlies when you're using 120 grit. To fix the channels that I'd created by taking out that box, I used some balsa offcuts from a previous project. I had to clear out the channel. There was a lot of gunk and paint and some old glue, but I cleared that out using my chisel and then sanded these pieces down to size before gluing them into place. The coffee table had two very fine separation lines between the timber on the top, so I filled this with Timbermate wood filler in the color hardwood. Once the repairs on the base were dry, I sanded the balsa down so that it was flush with the existing timber and used that same wood filler to fill any little gaps around the timber. While that was drying, I moved on to removing the paint from the underside of the tabletop. Once everything was completely sanded down smooth and all of the paint was removed, it was time to paint wash. Now, if you love the look of freshly sanded timber, but you still want to be able to seal it and not lose the color, then paint washing is a fantastic technique to use. This coffee table is solid beechwood timber, so it can have pinky orange undertones and it can have some darker places as well, which I had on the top here. You can see that one section of the table which is a little bit darker, so I chose a tone that would balance everything out and create a more uniform result in the end. If you want to learn this process in a little bit more depth, I created a raw timber furniture flipping guide, which you can find through the link in my bio, which will teach you everything that you need to know step by step. You will learn all of the color theory behind paint washing so that you can confidently choose the right tones for the look you are trying to achieve. But I also went ahead and created a cheat sheet with all of the paint colors and ratios that I'm using on my pieces currently, including this one. I did 2 coats of paint wash on this piece. I sped up my dry time with my hairdryer and I sanded in between each coat with 400 grit sandpaper, and I did 1 light sand at the very end when I had finished paint washing, and this just eliminates any raised grain that may have popped up from applying water back onto your piece. I chose Fitty Supreme Wax Polish to seal this piece. It's so easy to apply. I'm using a microfiber cloth here. This one comes in a range of colors, goes on matte, but has a very short dry time, so you can buff it out to achieve a higher sheen level within a couple of minutes. I applied 2 coats to the top of the piece and 1 to the legs and the underneath shelf. And guys, this is the end result. I absolutely love how this one turned out. I do love a rustic provincial farmhouse style piece. The tone overall is neutral, so it could go into anyone's aesthetic. And I would love to know what you guys think. Is it a nail or a fail?